and guidance. This is part 4 on authoring business processes. My name is Nicole Joyce, and I will be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this session through Teams live events. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Rachel Profit, Principal Program Manager. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Nicole. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Very excited for this Tech Talk series to continue. Again, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Rachel Profit. You can see a QR code here on the screen on the right-hand side, which will take you right to my LinkedIn profile to get connected if we're not already connected. But I am a Principal Program Manager here at Microsoft, and I do invite you to connect with me or reach out with any questions that you might have today or after today's session. My email is rachel.profit@microsoft.com. You can find my blog at dynamics365lady.com. Connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn at Rachel Profit, or check out my YouTube channel at Dynamics365 Unboxed. Again, this is the 4th Tech Talk in a series of Tech Talks. And today's session, we're switching gears from our first 3 parts of the series, where we're going to start talking about authoring. And in today's session, we're going to be talking about authoring business processes. Our session next week is about how to author business process patterns or user stories. Those are the level 4s. Today, we're focusing on level 3s. If you missed out on parts 1, 2, or 3 of our Tech Talk series, that have been going on for the last month or so, we do invite you to check out the recordings of those, which are available out on the YouTube channel, and we can post a link into the Q&A panel for you as well to access those. So let's take a quick look at our agenda for today's session. We will be taking a look at, first, how to identify business processes. So what is a business process? Who are they for? And I'll be doing a demonstration for you of the entire process for submitting a business process article. Then we'll kind of switch gears and go into like a deep dive on each of the sections of a business process article, the type of information you'll find in it, how to write these articles, and submit those articles over to Microsoft. Just as a side note, we are going to be getting out Credly badges to anyone who submits. We don't have the graphics completed yet, but do keep an eye out for announcements. We'll do another Tech Talk at that point once we have the full details about the Credly badging available. So let's go ahead and dive in to identifying business processes. So I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about what is a business process. A business process is a set of tasks that's completed in order to achieve a specific objective. And while a business process can be technology agnostic, it doesn't have to be Dynamics 365 specific. We have primarily identified all of the business processes that you can do with Dynamics 365. So the objective is, right, something related to a process that is supported with Dynamics 365 applications. We've identified around 800 of these business processes, which are available in the business process catalog. And the link to that catalog, again, if you missed parts 1 and 2, we talk in great detail about the catalog itself, but you can download that at aka.ms/business process catalog. There are lots of articles to be written, and our goal is to get to 75% coverage of those 800 level 3 business processes by July 2024. And for that, we need to come together as a community. Eventually, our goal is to have a full list of all of the business processes with documentation that will help guide people on their implementations, help you upskill new talent like in your customer and partner organizations, to learn about Dynamics 365, and to make your implementations generally go faster. So what is a business process for? We've outlined kind of 3 key elements of business processes. The audience, like who is it for? What level of detail does this article contain? And what's the purpose? So business process articles are designed for new consultants or business analysts that are learning about Dynamics 365 business applications. It can also be very useful for existing consultants or business analysts that are looking to learn another area of the system. You know, if you already know a particular area of the system, to find recommendations and best practices on how to implement a particular business process with Dynamics 365. We expect that all of our business process articles will be written at about a level 300 in terms of the amount and detail of information included. We expect that all of these articles will include a specific set of tasks organized in the sequence that they need to be conducted or executed in for achieving the objective of that particular business process. We'll also define when each of those steps or tasks need to be executed during the implementation and how many you might need for your particular implementation. We also want to make sure that these articles exude some how, right? What is the purpose? So these articles should provide those considerations and best practices for implementing the features that support a particular business process and provide technical information to achieve the implementation. It's important to note, though, that these business process articles are not product documentation themselves. However, they are there to link over to the product documentation that will help you as a user or an implementer understand how to achieve those particular tasks in a particular product. So I want to talk a little bit about a business process versus steps in a business process, or patterns, examples, user stories, whatever you might want to call them. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we can see examples of business processes, and steps or patterns are things that we are showing on the right-hand side. So when we think about business processes, it's things like creating a sales order or hiring employees, creating a purchase order, and so on. Steps or patterns are things that are part of a business process. So adding lines to a sales order is not a business process, it's a step. Creating a sales order that has miscellaneous charges on it, so like adding miscellaneous charges to it, is a pattern of creating a use case, a type of sales order, or a way that you might create a sales order, or a decision step that is made in the process of creating a sales order. So these are just a few examples. I've got another example at the bottom here, and I'm not going to read all of these out loud to you, but you can also create a patient account. So this is an example of an industry-specific pattern for creating a customer. So we call it creating a customer, but in the healthcare industry, they call it patients rather than customers. So that would be an example where the uniqueness of creating a patient account would be a pattern of creating a customer. So these are just a few very high-level examples that hopefully help explain the difference between a business process and a pattern or a step, or a use case or a user story. The process for creating these articles is pretty simple, and we've broken it down into 5 basic steps. And there's actually a 6th step that's not shown on here that I'm going to actually demonstrate for you, but you'll download the catalog, and the link is here in the slide. So when you download the presentation, you'll be able to get to it. But again, that is aka.ms/business process catalog. So once you've downloaded the catalog, you'll want to look through that catalog and decide which one you would like to author. And then what you'll want to do is check our GitHub issues list. The AKA link for that is aka.ms/business process catalog requests. And I'll be demonstrating this here for you shortly. And what you want to do there is check to make sure that nobody else is already authoring the article that you're interested in being an author for. We would hate for you to put a bunch of work in and then somebody else beat you to the punch because they already stuck it out there. So check the GitHub list to make sure that it's not already out there. If it's not already out there, then you're going to go ahead and create an issue request, which I'm going to walk you through in a demonstration, and you'll wait for approval. So somebody from the team here at Microsoft that's in our business process catalog team will receive your request. They'll look it over, make sure that, we didn't have a request come in from somewhere else and it's not out in the GitHub repository. And they'll give you a thumbs up, so to speak. They'll email you or reach out to you through the GitHub repository to say, hey, you're good to go. They may also provide to you a flow diagram as a starting point. We do have a lot of flow diagrams that we are using as the starting point. So if a flow diagram exists for a particular process, we will provide that to you. And part of your responsibility will be to review that flow diagram, update it, make any changes that are necessary. All of the flow diagrams need to be rebranded and recolored and some minor changes, but that will make your process go a lot faster. And then you're ready to download the template and get started authoring your article. And then when you're done authoring the article, you'll submit it. So what I want to do is walk you through this process, start to finish, in a quick demonstration. So I am going to switch over to, I've got my Excel spreadsheet open already. And so here in the Business Process catalog, which I've already downloaded, what I'm going to do, and I've already filtered this, I filtered down to order to cash. And then within order to cash, I filtered down to create and manage sales. When we talk about business processes, we're talking about anything that is in column D of the spreadsheet. If you want to filter the catalog down so that you only see those, you can unclick the checkbox for the user stories on column A for the type. And that will allow you to see just the ones that are like, it'll filter out all of the user stories and patterns. So your list will be a lot shorter. And so here you'll be able to see the list of these. So let's say I want to do the one that is review and confirm sales orders. It's important to note that you'll want to look for the exact name that's in here. So I'm going to copy the review and confirm sales orders. And what I'm going to do now is go over to my browser. The link here is that aka.ms/business process catalog requests. That's the page that you see I'm on right now. And it will take you right into the issues tab. So what I'm going to do is do a search. So I'm just going to paste into the filters box at the top of the window to see if review and confirm sales orders exists. And you'll notice that I do not see review and confirm sales. So I can unfilter that. If I wanted to also just double check, there are some other ways that you can filter this list. One quick and easy way is to filter by the labels. So if you want to look for everything in order to cash as a sample, you can see that these are the two that are out there for order to cash right now. So I can definitely submit this particular example for reviewing and confirming sales. So now that I know it doesn't exist, I'm going to go ahead and click on the new issue button. It's important to note that you will need to be logged into GitHub. So if you don't have a GitHub account, you'll need to walk through the process of creating a GitHub account before you can click on that new issue button. It'll give you an error message if you're not signed in and kind of walk you through that process. So this is a business process. So I'm going to use the new business process button here and click on Get Started. It prefixes the title for me with the name of it. So I'm going to copy and paste my review and confirm sales in here. And I'm going to go ahead and put in my email address. I am a Microsoft employee. And this is part of the order to cash business process. So I'm selecting that option from the end-to-end business process. This is part of the create and manage sales. So that is the default value here. But if you are doing a different business process, what you're looking to do is to copy and paste the value from column C exactly as it appears in column C directly into the which business process area is this article related to. And then the name of my business process is review and confirm sales. And then you can optionally type comments. So I would like to author this article. We also recommend that you create some labels. So this is a business process. It belongs to order to cash. And so I'm going to go ahead and choose those labels. If you forget this step, that's okay. We'll add those labels for you. And then the last field down here is like the date that you expect the article to be completed and ready for review. So let's say I'm going to have this done by March. So I'll type in 3/1/2024. It's important to note that you will need to agree to follow this project's code of conduct. You can read the code of conduct or access the FAQ here by clicking on the hyperlinks. Once you have filled in all of the required fields and marked the I agree to follow this project's code of conduct, and you click submit new issue, that will create the notification automatically to the owner of this particular end-to-end process within Microsoft. Once you receive that notice that you're ready to go and good to go, you'll get an email and we'll update the GitHub issue out here as well. The next step in the process is to download the template and get started. So what I'm going to do is navigate to the code tab in my GitHub issues, and I'm going to click on templates. Inside the templates folder, I'm going to click on business processes, and then I'm going to click on the L3 business process template. So if you don't have the template downloaded already, you'll need to come out here, grab that template and download it. So once you click on that file, you're going to use the download button or download raw file button that you see in the upper right-hand corner. Depending on your browser, the download experience might be a little bit different, but once you've downloaded that template, it will open up a Word document. Hopefully everybody is familiar with how to use Microsoft Office Word, and we've tried to make this process as easy as possible for creating your files. When you open up the file, all of the instructions for like how to fill it out are included in the red text, and all the text that is highlighted yellow is text that is supposed to be replaced or updated. We do recommend that you do a find and replace because we've got like placeholders for whatever the name of your business process is. So what we would recommend is that you use the find and replace, looking for business process name as an example, and then use the replace function and replace that with the name of your actual business process. When you do this, we do recommend that you do a match case because sometimes it'll be capitalized and sometimes it'll be lowercase. So we recommend that you do it twice, once for capital business process name, and then click replace all. And then do it a second time where you do a lowercase for the business process and replace it with a lowercase for the value as well. And so I'll do a replace all again. And it has now made some additional replacements. So now it's gone through and updated all of that, all of the instances to the actual name of my business process. And basically at this point, you're going to follow the instructions on each of the different sections. Any text that is white should not be modified or updated. That's standard text that we include in all articles. And obviously before you submit the article, you'll want to make sure that you've deleted all of the red text and all of the yellow text is replaced and, back to its standard white text. So unhighlight all the yellows, but we've included all of the sections that can be included, and make sure at the bottom of the article that you put your contributor name, like who's going to get credit for this article. You can include a link to your LinkedIn profile along with your job title or something similar to indicate like what your role is. So like if you're an MVP, right, you could indicate here that you're an MVP. If there are multiple people contributing to your article, make sure that you give all of those people credit in the other contributors section of your article. And at that point, after you've filled out your document for your business process, you're ready to submit it. The submission process, we've again tried to make this as easy as possible. The AKA link is aka.ms/D365 submit PNP. This will open up a customer voice survey where you'll be able to fill out those details and attach your files. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this out. entering in my name, my email address, selecting which type of organization I work for, put my LinkedIn profile, and I'll indicate that this is a new article and click Next. Here, I'll enter in the name of my article, which is Review and Confirm Sales. This is a business process article, and I would click on the Upload File button and go choose a file. I'm just going to upload the template for this particular example since it's not real and I didn't finish it. You'll also need to upload the source graphics. So for your source graphics, if you uploaded, like if you had your process flow diagram and a Visio diagram, you would include both of those files. I'm just going to choose a QR code that I have here in my downloads, but you'll want to upload the source graphics. We prefer your graphics be saved as an SVG, but if you don't do that, we'll do it for you. But I'll be walking through that process in detail. You can type in any additional comments or information that you want the team to know in question number 10. And then you'll need to select which end-to-end business process the article relates to. So I'm going to select order to cash. Again, I'm going to type in the exact name of the business process area and click Next. This will bring you to the tags page. And here I'll need to tag this for each of the products that my article applies to. So if my article applies to Dynamics 365 sales and supply chain management, I would mark those two products. Let's say if it also applies to commerce, right? You can mark as many products as you want. You can also mark which industries your article applies to. So let's say that mine relates to wholesale and retail trade. So I can mark those two industries. And then the last question is the stakeholders. So maybe this article applies to accounts receivable, and then retail store operations and sales. So you'll mark the check boxes for whichever stakeholders it applies to, and then you'll click the submit button. I'm not actually going to click the submit button because this is obviously not a real article that I have written, but that is the basic process. So at this point, what I want to do is go back to our PowerPoint slide and talk about in a little bit more detail each of the sections of the article and how to fill them out. But at a high level, if you're just looking for the basic instructions, everything I just walked you through is the process that you need to go through. The rest of my presentation is just going to go into a lot more detail, each of the sections of the article with some samples and guidance on how to fill those out. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the anatomy of a business process article. When you look at the navigation pane on the left-hand side, if you turn it on in the Word document template, you'll find that we have the introduction, stakeholders, the process flow, the implementing section, which is like where the steps are at. Next steps, like, so what should I do after this? Any related patterns, related resources, and the contributors. So those are the basic sections that you'll find. I have a sample here on the side, which is the set customer credit limits. This document is already published and available out in the Guidance Hub. So if you're looking for a sample that's already been written, the set customer credit limits is a great example that you can use. So again, when you're getting started with the template, you'll download that file and you'll open it up. You saw me do some of the basics and I talked through some of this already, but you're going to name that file according to the business process. We ask that when you name your files, you don't use any spaces, and use nouns and verbs. And we use dashes in between each of those words rather than spaces. And we type the names in all lowercase. If you get this wrong, that's okay. It just makes the process easier for us. If you don't name it correctly, we're going to rename it for you. Then you'll want to save your template into a folder. Like if you're writing lots of these, we recommend that you create a folder for each end to end, but you don't have to like save it anywhere specific. And keep in mind that the instructions in the article are in the red brackets. And after you've completed those instructions and done what it suggests or indicates that you should do, you should delete that red text in between the brackets. Any text that is supposed to be replaced or adjusted is highlighted yellow, and you should not change any of the plain white text. So the introduction is very important for your article. The very first sentence is critical for search engine optimization so that when people search for, specific topics or text in a search engine like Google or Bing, they can find your article easily. So writing that very first sentence is like that announcement, that one-liner. What is this article going to be about? Keep in mind your audience. So, what terminology should we be using? We don't want you to use lots of very specific Dynamics 365 terminology or jargon until later in your article. That introduction should still be high level. And if you're introducing new terminology, we want you to make sure that you're explaining that terminology in your article. You're going to indicate in that introduction, why is this business process important? And what's the impact it has on an organization? Think about if this process is designed well, how it can positively impact. And if it's not designed well, what are the negative impacts it can have on the organization? And you'll also want to provide some guidance about when during an implementation, this particular business process should be done. So like that introductory paragraph or paragraphs should kind of answer these questions for the reader. One of the key things that are part of a business process article are the graphics, and specifically the process flow diagram. As we're developing the content and the graphics for these, it's important that we have consistency in the way that we create our business process flow diagrams. And so what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about what goes into the process flow. So here you can see a sample of the set customer credit limits process flow, which is available in that article that I just mentioned, set customer credit limits, out on the Guidance Hub. The first thing that you'll want to make sure is included in your process flow is the name. So at the very top of the article, you're going to include the word process name with a colon followed by the actual name. Again, it should match exactly. So if I was doing the confirm and review sales, that's the exact text that I would paste into this particular part. On the left-hand side, you can see that we have multiple swim lanes. This particular diagram has 2 swim lanes, and the titles and the words that we use in the swim lanes should be the out-of-the-box security rules that are provided that, we would recommend to be using for these particular processes or steps in that process. Every single business process flow that you create should always have a start box. And obviously the start box or circle, oval, if you will, is where the business process will start. Optionally, some business processes may have prerequisite steps that need to be done before you start this particular process. So setting customer credit limits, for example, requires that you first have a customer. And so you can see that is done with an off-screen reference. So that's the circle that you see and a square down here to create a customer. If there were 2 or 3 prerequisites, you can include as many of those as you need, but we do recommend that those prerequisites are sequenced in the right order that they would be done before starting this particular business process. Next, you'll create one step or one task, if you will, activity for each business process that needs to be executed for that particular process to reach the objective of setting the customer credit limits. Each step that you add will have a smaller box underneath it that indicates which application the process is done in. So you'll notice that some of the boxes in my particular sample process flow are manual, and we've used the abbreviation FIN for processes that are done inside of Dynamics 365 Finance. We have an article, which I have a link to, and I'll show it to you a little bit later on, that actually has all of the abbreviations that are okay to use. Some process flows that you create might also have approval steps or branching steps. So this is an example here where you can see we've used a decision box, which is a diamond-shaped box with a yes and a no branch out to, the process to indicate how this works if it's approved or not. Every process should also include an end box, and the end box should always be the last step, but it's okay. There might be some decision boxes or things that happen in a process flow that can make the process end prematurely. So it is okay to have multiple arrows that point into the end box, like if appropriate. This particular example does not have that. So we've pulled together a couple of tips to help guide you in the process for building your process flows. Think about and start with any setup that's going to be required before you do whatever the thing is, whatever that business process or objective is that you're trying to meet. We also recommend that you test your process with the out-of-the-box security rules. So if you actually log into Dynamics 365 with a user that is assigned the security rules, that will help you make sure that you're putting the steps into the right swim lane box for your particular example. You'll also want to consider if there's any other prerequisites from other business process areas, or they could come from even entirely different end-to-end processes. So for example, if I was doing the business process for create a sales order, I need a customer, which is part of, order to cash still, but I also need a product, and the product itself is going to come from the design to retire business process. So it's not even inside of the order to cash. You'll want to document the logical process steps or screens that are used. And when you have parallel steps, things that are going to happen at the same time, consider using horizontal layouts to maybe make it easier to read. It's not a hard and fast rule. Obviously, you have to use your best judgment when you're creating it. But after you've got all of the boxes kind of in the right sequence, then you can start to connect the arrows between each of your sub-processes and your business process area, and make sure that start at the start and you end at the end. And also think about any of those key decision points where you're going to branch out, and make sure that any of the branches that you put on have a yes and a no branch. So I wanted to review quickly a reminder for people about what are process steps and what process steps are not. Process steps are not product documentation or a list of every single click that you should perform in the software to perform that task. It's the overall process of what you're doing. Oftentimes that might be opening or using a particular screen in Dynamics 365. They could also be steps that or a series of steps that you're going to create or complete in Lifecycle Services or the Power Platform Admin Center. It could be things that you do outside of Microsoft, like in Azure or other Microsoft products, but they could also be things or series of steps that are done outside the system entirely. So like, for example, if you're going to email the customer, right? And you're going to use Outlook to do that. Also, think about a third-party system or another system that might be used to perform and do certain steps. And those manual steps, things like that, happen completely outside the system in order to get from point A to point B to achieve the objective that you've done. Hopefully, as all of you know, accessibility is very important to all of our presentations. And so and all of our content that we create. So it's important that we describe any graphics that we create. And you might find that some business processes need two versions of a process flow if it's too complicated or there's too many branches in it. Sometimes it may be easier to create two separate process flows for a particular process, but it's important that any graphic that you include in your articles is described. And the graphic should be described in such a way that you're describing it for someone who is blind. We draw the assumption that your reader cannot see the graphic and is using a screen reader, like the worst case scenario, if you will, that they cannot see your graphic at all. And you need to describe that graphic to somebody so that the information included in that graphic is worth the 1,000 words that it likely is worth. So every object and every arrow in your description should be included, and we use parentheses after the step to indicate if that step was manual or if it was done in Dynamics 365 Finance or Commerce or Sales, for example. The steps that we create are a numbered list, so it's like 1, 2, 3. And step 1 is always the start box, and we try to describe the happy path first. If you do have parallel branches, so if you have an object that has 2 arrows out of it, and it's a parallel step or a parallel branch, we describe that as text below the step. And when you're referring to another step in the list, so if we're jumping from step 3 to step 6 in a diagram, then we say step 6 and then whatever the name of step 6 is. So that the reader knows like where we're jumping to in the list of steps. So we do have an example of a graphic and text. So again, we're using the set customer credit limits, and that article is available out there. On the left-hand side, you can see the sample graphic. And on the right-hand side, you can see the sample steps that we have documented for this particular step. So you can see the prerequisite steps. All of the manual steps indicate that they're manual in parentheses, and the exact processes that are included. You can see that when we get to the approval step, which is step 13 in this particular example, then we have our if not approved and if approved. We go to step 14, and then obviously we have our end. You'll notice that below the diagram, we have the description of the swim lanes. So I'm indicating the step numbers 3 through 9 are in one swim lane that's dedicated to the accounts receivable clerk or the accounts receivable manager, and steps 10 through 14 are in a second swim lane that's dedicated to the accounts receivable manager or accounting manager. So your swim lane descriptions will always follow your graphic. So when you're done creating your graphic, whether you create that in PowerPoint or Visio, you'll want to make sure that all of your connectors are blue. We want our connector width to be 2 1/4. And then what you can do is highlight all of the objects. And the easiest way to do that is to press Control A. And that works in either Visio or in PowerPoint. And then you're going to right click with your mouse and select Save as Picture. We recommend again that you save the graphic as an SVG file. The default, I do believe, is a PNG, but you'll want to switch that in the drop-down box. And then you're going to name the file, whatever the name of your business process is. So set customer credit limits for the example that we've been doing in today's presentation with process flow. And again, we use the dashes instead of spaces. Then you'll open up your Word document and click Insert on the action pane and choose Picture. And then you'll browse to that correct file and insert it into your Word document where you want that process flow diagram to go. And then make sure that the description of your graphic, so the numbered steps, will follow the graphic immediately after that particular graphic. So this slide is just some more tips and things to make your graphics better. We recommend that you keep your graphics simple when possible. Minimize the numbers of squares and lines. If you need lots of arrows on it and there's lots of overlapping and you can't arrange them in a nice sequential way, consider using on or off page references. And you can use notes in your description to describe an alternative path, or even in some cases, if you've excluded an arrow for simplicity of reading the diagram, you can use a note or a superscript, if you will, to indicate what is not shown in your diagram. Also, ask yourself, when you're creating the diagram, is that really a level 3 step? Or is that a click or a step-by-step that would be included in the level 4 documentation with a pattern or a use case? Make sure that you're not making a square for every single click that you do in the software. So the next section of your article is the implementation guidance. And so the implementation guidance is important. It's probably arguably one of the most important sections, I think, of the article. And so implementation section is broken down into an introduction where you describe the solution at a very high level. We include a tip box to use the glossary. And that glossary of terms has all the words that are specific to Dynamics 365. And if there's more than one potential solution, you're going to list out the potential solutions and describe when to use each one. So the example of setting customer credit limits actually has 5 potential solutions across all of our products. And so there are 5 different tables, and a sentence or 2 that describes when you should use each solution. And each solution that you offer should have a table. And the table is describing the steps that you would need to go through in order to implement that solution. So the example that we have on our screen is like the basic credit limit checking, and that's done in finance in the credit and collections management module. And we've described when to use it, followed by the exact steps. The table is in your template, and it includes several pages. And the next couple of slides that I'm going to go through are going to describe what those all mean. But we do have a docs article that you can read as well that walks you through the process of what all of the different process stages, process modifiers, and the app navigation and entity abbreviations are. So when you're creating that implementing section, you're going to write an introductory paragraph for that. So in that introductory paragraph, describe which product or products are going to be used, and you'll want to list the names of specific features. In any situation where the name of the feature is maybe not a normal term or concept that's used in organizations, you'll want to make sure that that term or that feature has a glossary entry, but you may also want to describe that or indicate, like if I use batch numbers or batch orders as an example, like batch numbers are typically referred to as lot numbers in the food and beverage industry, but the term that we use in Dynamics is batch. So making sure that you're using both of those terms so that people understand that batch and lot are typically terms that are used interchangeably. And in this context, what does batch mean? The tip box that I showed you about the glossary, you'll want to make sure you include that. And don't change any of the text that kind of starts out the following sections describe blah, 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 blah. So that's standard text that explains to people how to use the table. The article, Business Processes, Steps, and How to Find Things, which we've included a link here to, includes the details about all of the other process steps that I'm about to explain to you. So when you're creating the solution section, you're going to include the product name and the module or feature in parentheses just below it. So in this example, for basic credit limit checking, you can see that this is done in Dynamics 365 Finance. So we said finance, and then we use credit and collections management, which is the name of the module. Just below that, we have a sentence or a paragraph that describes when you should use this particular option or feature. And then just below that is where you'll put your table in. So now what I'm going to do is describe each of these columns and what they're used for. The first column is the process steps. So process steps are sequential steps that you'll need a user or a consultant would need to execute in order to configure and use this particular process in Dynamics 365. We organize the sequential steps from top to bottom in the table. So the step that you should do first is first. And the very last step in your table should be the actual process. So like creating of the sales order or setting of the customer credit limit. Ideally, in a perfect world, every single step that you include would have a hyperlink that takes you to product documentation that describes how to actually set up and perform that particular task in our software. So in our example of setting customer credit limits, we need to set the credit and collections management parameters. And so that's the first step. And the hyperlink would take you to an article in the product documentation that describes how to set up credit and collections parameters. We want you to avoid back and forth as much as possible in the steps, but we understand that sometimes the software and the configuration steps do not support that. If there is back and forth that is required in the steps, like you have to do this step, do the next step, and then go back to the previous step, we ask that you include a note about that for the reader below the table. And it is okay if there's multiple notes that you can use either superscript or stars to indicate which note goes with each step when you have more than one thing to note to the user. The second column in the table is the process stage. Process stages have three pieces of data or information that's included in them: the project phase, the configuration stage, and the process type. The project phases are strategize, initialize, develop, prepare, and operate. These map to each of the project stages that we use in Success by Design, and you can read more about these stages in the implementation guide and the article about process stages as well. There are three configuration stages, which are base, foundational, and optional. We've described in detail in our process steps, where to find things article, what each of these means, but at a high level, base means it's a configuration that's required in any implementation. It's kind of part of what makes the system operate. So that would include things like a legal entity or a number sequence for finance and operations. Foundational configurations are things that are like important to a particular process, but they're not mandatory to run the system as a whole. They're only really mandatory or foundational to a particular business process. And then there's optional things. So things that you don't have to have in order to run the system or run the process, but you can set these up, which might enhance your particular process. And each process is either a configuration or an operational process. Configurations are things that you typically will find in like the setup folder or the setup area or the administrative area. And operational steps are things that happen over and over and over. Typically, like every process will always have at least one operational and one or more configurations, but there could be instances where there are no configurations required to do an operation. Especially if the configurations all come from a different business process. The next column in the table is process modifiers. Process modifiers help clarify when and how a process should be done. There are 5 different options to pick from, and you can include one or more of these. It is also possible that a process may not have any process modifiers if none of these options apply. So this is the only column that's okay to leave blank. The options are early, gold, continuous, at least one, and multiple are recommended. So early means that you should do it early in your process. Gold is something that would be specific to a finance and operations related configuration, since we don't recommend that you use gold configurations for customer engagement applications. And it indicates that it should go into the gold configuration. More information about gold environments is available in our article about process steps and how to find things, as well as in the implementation guide. Continuous means it's something that you do continually. Oftentimes, operational steps are continuous, but they may not be. It might be something that is done once a month or once a quarter or once a year, and those would not be continuous. At least one means that you need at least one of these in order to set up and use the system, and multiple are recommended. It means that we recommend that you have more than one of these set up for the most optimal configuration of the system. The last column in the table is the app, navigation, and entity column. This column uses a combination of abbreviations for the application interface, the navigation, and the entity or entities, if there's more than one, for this particular step. The application interface is always 2 to 4 letters, and you should use the letters that we've documented in our article. Use all caps, and we do not allow you to say CE or F&O. So if it's a CE related process, choose the application that's most likely based on your business process. So we understand that some setups or configurations might apply to multiple applications. But if you're in like an order to cash or a prospect to quote application or process, for example, use the abbreviation for sales. But if you're in a customer service case to resolution process, use customer service as your application that you indicate. So it's the one that the user would most likely be using. When you type out your navigation, we always want you to start from the main menu or the home screen of the application so that users know how to navigate to there. And we use the greater than or the caret symbol in between each click. And the entity, we use DMF for data migration framework or FNO based entities, or DV for Dataverse entities for CE related entities. After DMF or DV, you're going to include that colon along with the system name of the entity or table that you're using. If there's more than one, then you can list them out with commas. The next section of your article is your next steps. And the next steps for business processes are important because they help describe the logical sequence of events. What should happen after this particular set of steps? How do we implement that specific business process? And it's going to give context for the new consultant or business maker. Think to yourself, what would be important to learn next if this was brand new to you? And what would be critical to do next in your project? When you're writing the next steps, you take the business processes within an area, and they generally have a logical sequence, and you can use the business process area flow as a guide for those sequence, and then write the article right in parentheses after the step that you're on. This is the article you're currently reading. And then where available and appropriate, we want a hyperlink to all the other steps. So if you're on step 3 and the articles for step 1 and 2 have already been published, then you'll want to put the hyperlink to step 1 and 2, which is just the article that was already published for step 1 and 2. Tagging is important, and it's the next section of the document. You don't actually see the tags in the text of your article, but it is important. Tagging helps create structure and metadata for the articles, and creates clarity about who and what an article applies to, and will help make your articles more discoverable. There are 3 different tags that we've identified, which are the industries, the stakeholders, and the products. To make the process easy, we've included the full list of possible tags in the template, and all you need to do is delete the tags that do not apply, and when you submit your article, you'll mark the same checkboxes. The next section in your article is the resources for business process articles. And so this is where you're going to create hyperlinks to anything else that might be relevant. So this is product documentation, it could be tech talks, it could be certifications, anything else that might be useful for the reader to learn about that is specific or related to this particular business process. We've gathered a list of possible things that might be valuable to include. So that could be specific tech talks or a tech talk series, fast track architect community calls, specific product documentations, implementation guide chapters, implementation toolkits, learn courses or Microsoft Learn modules, certification or exams that are specific to the business process area, any GitHub samples that are available out there. If there's marketing related videos that highlight the benefits that you mentioned in a particular article, or demonstrations of conference videos with demos, blogs for specific features, or other links that might be relevant. So that is the process for writing these articles. We've pulled together a list of resources that you can use to help you get started on your journey of authoring these articles. And you can use these links. Many of these links are the links that I've been talking about in today's presentation. We've got our contributor guide. The business processes about steps navigation is that article that I recommend you bookmark that one. The one here at the bottom, very useful for all the different abbreviations and what all those columns in our tables mean. We invite you to stay connected with us. If you're not connected with us on our LinkedIn page or the community YouTube page, where the recording of today's presentation will be updated. And if you want to subscribe for upcoming Tech Talks, be sure to use our link to subscribe to that. And we'll open it up for questions at this point.
We had just one question, I think, that we were not able to answer in the chat that maybe you can address here. And that is, will we be able to add ISV specific steps to the business processes?
This is an excellent question. The short answer is yes. However, typically ISV like specific steps won't actually go in an L3 article. They would go in an L4 article, and it would be a pattern. There are some caveats to that. So like if there's specific steps that you need to do in an ISV or ISV solutions that solve a problem or give a different pattern of doing a business process, Those can be submitted to be added to the catalog. The ISV solution does need to be available out in the app source. So we don't support this for ISV solutions that are not in app source. And so I would suggest join us on our Tech Talk next Thursday when we talk about L4 patterns and practices and user stories, because that's typically more likely where it applies. If your ISV does have an overall business process, an L3, that is not included in our catalog, we can add additional L3s, but please do submit those as a catalog request first and make sure that we can add the row and that we're putting it in the right place in the catalog before you author an actual article to go with the L3. So if you do want to add an L3 or an L4, you do that in the GitHub repository by adding a catalog request. It's the very top issue type rather than the new business process. You're only going to use the new business process button when you're authoring against a row that already exists in the catalog. So hopefully that answers the question. And we do invite ISVs to come publish articles about their solutions, and their additional value add that they put on top of it. If you're writing the article as an ISV, in the contributor section at the bottom of the article, you are allowed to put the name of your company rather than the name of a person as the publisher, with a link to the company's like website or LinkedIn site for an ISV solution, and then like add the people that wrote it as a contributor below the primary author being the ISV or the business, the company, the partner that has authored.
Thanks, Rachel. I think in that answer, you also answered one of the other questions we had, which we've answered in the chat, but for the sake of the recording, I'll ask you here as well. Someone asked, are we going to cover the best practices to document business process steps? And is this guidance available on Learn?
Great question. So that's really like, those are going to be the L4. So the step-by-steps and like the specific values that you would choose in a specific use case is a pattern or a user story or a use case, whatever you want to call it. And our Tech Talk next week, we'll talk about those L4s and how you can publish L4 articles as well. There are some key differences in the layout and the type of information to be included there, but that is the plan, that those L4s would have that type of step-by-step guidance.
Great. Thanks for answering that for the recording. I have not seen any new questions come in, so I think that's all of the questions for now.
Fantastic. Well, I guess thank you everyone for joining us today. We do have a link for the survey here on the screen. Your feedback is important to us, so please take a moment to complete a short survey about today's session. And the QR code here will take you right to that survey. You can scan that with your phone. The link is on the screen, and I think Nicole will also paste that into the Q&A as an announcement for you if you'd rather click on it from the chat as well. With that, I think that's all we have for today, since I don't see any other new questions coming in. And we will hopefully see you next week on part 5.